Hey guys, it's Holly. Thank you so much for stopping by, whether you're watching this on social media or on YouTube or on my blog. I'm so grateful you're here because today I'm joined by John Seidl, who is a great friend of mine and is releasing a book about his story around anxiety and OCD. And this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. And I just am really enjoying watching John be vulnerable and courageous and stepping out and sharing his story. So John, thank you so much for hanging out with me and being willing to share your story with me.
Yeah, I'm excited about this because I think as what people may or may not realize is we've been friends forever.
Yes.
I helped recruit you to the college that we both graduated from. So
Shout out to King's College.
That's right.
New York City.
That's right. Send your kids there.
Yep.
We're both on the alumni committee, so.
We are.
So I'm just excited to talk as friends.
Yeah.
And I know that there's some stuff that you want to communicate and definitely some stuff that I want to communicate. So
Yeah,
I'm excited.
for sure. So actually, that's a great place to start. Like, let's go back to, I guess, let's see, so 2008 would have been when I started college.
Yeah.
And I met you, at Operation Airlift was what it was called.
Yes.
So fun. But yeah, so in college, you were a little bit ahead of me, but I always perceived you as this energetic, John Seidl was like the life of the party. Like you were just so fun and always had the jokes and all the energy. And so that's how I always perceived you as. So tell me a bit about your story, and I guess we could start either before that or in college, wherever you want.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, and I'm glad you did because I think it's such an important point to make is that while I was always that person, and I would say I still am that person,
Yes,
right?
you totally are.
That there was always something really kind of deeper going on inside. And what's interesting is I couldn't quite at the time name it and understand exactly what it is. But on the inside I was, there's that old thing that's probably up in like a lot of businesses where it's like a picture of a duck. And it's like, be the duck, like, on the top you're like really composed and water's just rolling off your back, and then underneath you like paddling like hell,
Yeah.
And so like it's corny, but it's legitimately I think how I lived most of my life. And honestly, I don't know how I got through college. I don't know how I got through high school. I don't know how I got through the first part of my marriage, and almost didn't, because of a lot of the stuff that was going on inside. And a lot of that was fear, it was anxiety, it was panic attacks, it was obsessive thoughts that I just could not get out of my head no matter how much I wanted to, right? And so that was kind of marked, my whole life was marked by that. And like I said, I got married, and a few years into our marriage, my wife was like, just kind of broke down in front of me. There was an incident, an event of, it was like, if you have anxiety or OCD, like this is gonna sound familiar, right? But like I had the wrong sweetener in my coffee and it just like threw me off. And I don't mean threw me off like into a violent rage, it wasn't smacking walls or anything, but where things are just out of place or done in a different order, or you expect them to be one way and they don't happen that way, and your body just doesn't know how to react to it. And you want to stop reacting that way. I was talking to some friends last night that jokingly, they're like, what's the one thing to like not say to people with anxiety or OCD? I said, don't tell them to just stop thinking about it already,
Yeah.
because listen, I get it. Like, I want to just stop thinking about it. Like,
Yeah.
if I could,
I would
just stop thinking about it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So the frustration is not like, the frustration is partly at ourselves, right? Like, we wish we could just stop thinking about it. We know that it's irrational. It doesn't make sense, that, the reality is different. But there's so much more that's going on. So that was my life.
Yeah.
That was, my wife is sitting in front of me. She's broken down. She's like, you got to get help. And I think finally I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, this isn't normal. Like, this is not what she signed up for, right? She didn't sign up for being always walking on eggshells and not understanding like what one little thing could send me into a cycle of thoughts that would ruin the entire day.
Yeah.
And that was what our life was like.
And I remember in your book, that story is so powerful because you guys are at a coffee shop, right?
Yep.
And then, did you have Annie at the time?
We did not.
Okay,
So-
it was just you guys.
Right. We were just about to get pregnant with our first.
And then, it's like Brett, the way I remember the story is like she was trying to help you. I think you went to the bathroom or something.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh yeah, just put the sweetener. Like what they were out of your
They were
favorite.
out of Sweet and Low. I'm a Sweet and Low guy. I hate Splenda though.
Yeah.
It tastes like chalk butt to me.
Chalk butt. Chalks have a butt.
If chalk had butt,
It would be
that's
that.
what Splenda would taste like to me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you come back from the bathroom, and what was in the coffee?
Splenda. Yeah.
Splenda, yeah. And then you say, she broke down in front of you, but like, really, what was the moment where you finally were like, okay, this isn't normal?
So I think it was like the day after when she's in front of me and kind of saying that her life in our marriage up until this point has been, hellish, right? Where it's not been enjoyable. That doesn't mean there's not been enjoyable. There wasn't enjoyable moments or that, there was regret, or anything like that. But where it just had become this, not what she thought marriage was going to be. And sure, like there's sermons, like we could go like, yeah, marriage is never technically always what you expect it to be.
Sure,
like it wasn't any of like those type of things, but it was, I'm committed to you, but just you should know that I'm committed to you, and it's going to be really hard for me for the rest of our lives if this is what I'm committed to.
Yeah.
And like I'm still in it, and I'm still in for the long haul, but man, I wish this wasn't so. Like, can you see that, when you complain that I don't clean the house in this certain order, and that throws you off for the day, like that's not normal.
Yeah.
And it's like that, and so that was the moment, like that was that incident, and then the day after, where I was like, wow, you're right. And it's so tiring for the person going through it. Like anxiety is tiring. If you've gone through and had panic attacks afterwards, like your body is just so tired.
Yeah.
And in the book I talk about that kind of the physiological of what's happening inside, but it is your body doesn't quite, it's an overactive fight or flight response. Your body misperceives things as threats.
Yeah.
So something happens, your body sees it as a threat, and so you go into this kind of back and forth fight or flight. What do I do? Where do I go? How do I react? And so that's tiring, right? If you get a rush of adrenaline, if someone comes up to you and puts a knife to your throat, and you get a rush of adrenaline and it's a fight or flight response, like afterwards, you come down and you're kind of tired. You're like, oh, wow, or anyone who's gotten in a car accident.
Yeah.
That happens. And afterwards you're like, oh man, I'm tired because you've been tense. So that's what my life had been like, right? And so
does it feel like that on a daily basis for somebody that has OCD?
Yeah.
Is it like, or multiple times a day?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so I'm glad you brought that up because, so I've been diagnosed with anxiety and OCD. And it's kind of one of those circle problems you did in school.
Like a Venn diagram?
Yeah, exactly. So everyone who has OCD has anxiety. Not everyone who has anxiety has OCD.
Hold on, let's repeat that one more time. Everyone who has OCD has anxiety.
Right.
But not everyone who has anxiety has OCD.
Right. So
OCD tell us what the
is kind of like, and if you're a psychologist out there, like I don't pretend to be this, right? So if I say something that you're like, well, it's not technically true, like please email me, john@johnseidl.com. Let's talk about it. But I'm going to say you're right.
Yeah.
But so for lack of in the simplest phrase, like OCD is in a sense a subset of anxiety.
Okay.
And really it's a way that your body is trying to make sense of your anxiety. So you get anxious about the door being locked, right?
Yeah.
That thought gets stuck in your head. And so that's the obsessive part. You're obsessing about the door not being locked. The compulsion, the C, is what you're doing to try to stop the anxiety. So I'm worried about my safety. I'm worried about the door. Is it locked or not locked? The compulsion is I have to keep checking the door.
Yeah.
I have to make sure it's locked. Even though I just did, I think that by performing this action, performing this ritual, that's going to stop the thought, and that's going to make the anxiety go away.
Yeah.
So the OCD is a way to cope with the anxiety that you're feeling, or that's a way to name that coping mechanism of trying to get rid of the anxious thought that's kind of buried into your head. So for me, I'm never a big compulsion person, right? I mean, there's degrees. I was never necessarily, I shook your hand like a Howie Mandel and, I'm going to go wash it for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Which sounds ridiculous, but that's literally what would happen with someone like Howie.
Yeah.
It's mine is more intrusive thought of, I can't stop thinking about, I sent an email to my boss and I'm anxious about, did I communicate a tone that I didn't want to? Were there typos in there that could maybe change the meaning? And so I would reread it upwards of 50 times in a row.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the compulsion. Oh, if I do this act, if I perform this ritual, then that thought will finally go away.
Yeah.
So that's the importance of kind of understanding the anxiety is the parent, right? The OCD is kind of a offshoot of that, and it's a way to deal with the general anxiety disorder.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to clarify the Venn diagram part of that. But let's unpack the anxiety part, because I even struggle with this sometimes, right? Like, what is the difference between having anxiety in a moment or struggling with being anxious or for a season? A lot of high achievers, I know in my own life, like I have lots of anxious thoughts and have seasons where I'm very highly anxious. But what's the difference between that and being diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, or, what is the difference between those two? Is there a difference? Talk to me about that.
So glad you asked that. When I first went to my psychiatrist, he told me, he said, everyone has a little anxiety and OCD in them. And I thought, like, he's just maybe trying to, make me feel better. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But the more that I dealt with what was going on, the more that I talked to people, the more that I opened up, I found out, like, how right he was. And the point is this. I think, everyone can get anxious. Everyone can have thoughts that they can't get out of their head, right? But when there's a difference between episodic, so, maybe a family member dies, maybe you get in a car accident, and those are anxious moments, right? So there's a difference between that and clinical. And so, again, the way that I've kind of described it to people is, when something becomes clinical is when it starts really hampering your day-to-day life, right? People can be particular, right? And by the way, I don't get offended when people are like, "Oh, you're so OCD." Not me, but maybe kind of throw the term around, "Oh, that's so OCD." Like, I mean, because I've come to understand, like, yeah, that is a little OCD. It doesn't mean it's clinical OCD. So people who like certain wine or like their steak cooked a certain way, like, you could say, that's a little bit particular. But when they literally can't eat anything but a steak cooked that way, and they have to eat it every day of the week, when they can't drink a wine unless it's poured in a certain order, and the glass is wiped in a certain way. Like, those things start to hamper your daily activities and who you are. Right? So that's when it goes from episodic to clinical. And that's still to say, I mean, I had my sister and my stepdad die both within the last 3 years, right? Like, you can still have very long episodes that need to be clinically treated, right? It's depression that happens as a result of someone dying. But just if generally being down because you lost someone, that's not necessarily a clinical depression. But but by the way, you should be more aware, because that can more easily lead to a clinical depression and diagnosis.
Yeah. So what should people do to be able to process those seasons or those instances, or know the difference between those two? Like, what do you recommend people do?
So,
besides buy your book, because they should really that.
Yeah, right? I think the most important thing, listen, you can never, I think it's always better to err on the side of caution, right? And so if you found yourself being really down or really obsessed about certain things, just go see someone and talk to them, right? Even your primary care physician can help you identify these things. So it's not like, I mean, I went to a psychiatrist right away because, the story in the book you'll learn is I talked to my sister about it afterwards, and she goes, "Oh, hey, did you not realize that OCD and anxiety run in the family?" And I didn't, right? And then she starts describing all these things, and oh my gosh, yes, right? So it was fairly obvious to me right away, and you should know that too, by the way. Like, start to think about your family history. It became obvious to me right away, so I went straight to a psychiatrist, right? But you can go talk to your family physician, go talk to a counselor, right? Like, talk to a pastor, talk to someone and say, "Hey, does this seem a little odd, or just seem a little off to you? Like, this is what I've been dealing with, and this is what I've been struggling with." Now, fast forward, and there's an entire chapter in the book of why I wrote to the church, so that when people like that come to you as a pastor or as a church leader, you are better equipped to help them unpack that and help understand, and then point them to other resources that may be helpful to them. So I'm calling you as the person to go talk to someone, and then I'm hopefully calling the church and church leaders to better be equipped to understand and point people to other resources that can help them determine what the next step should be.
Which, great segue, John. Let's talk about the church and the church's relationship with anxiety and depression and mental illness in general.
Right.
I've spent the last decade working with churches all over the world, churches and ministries, and even part of my own story is not having a very judgmental outlook on folks in my own life who have been open about struggling with depression or anxiety. And I just thought, like, oh, it's a mindset thing, like, it's, if you just work harder or relax more or, get over it, it's just a season. And what I've come to realize is, and even in my own last couple of years, really the past year and a half, where I've even had moments where I'm like, wow, like I've never experienced this much anxiety in my own life. And I realize how important this conversation is. And then we're seeing over and over and over again how many pastors don't get the help that they need because of fear of judgment or not knowing what to do, because ministry can get so messy when our spiritual advisors are our best friends, who are also family, or, and our coworkers. Like, it's all so convoluted that there's often not those safe spaces where people in ministry can be open about it. So I feel like I could just do a whole video on this topic. But here's my question to you, John, is if you are a church leader watching, like, what would you say to people of influence in church or ministry that they need to hear from you?
So I think this is one of those topics that I hit in several different ways in the book from several different angles, because I think it's so important. And so the first angle and the first thing I would say is medication is okay. And I, by the way, I'm really encouraged, and I just want to say thank you for being open and saying what you just said about like, hey, you had a judgmental attitude and wasn't properly viewing it. Like, I'd rather have people come out and say that than to dig in their heels, right? And so, as I'm being open and vulnerable, hopefully, and encouraging people to do the same, like, I love that you're doing that. So I just wanted to call that out. But,
well, because here's what I learned, John, in my own ignorance and not listening and leading with empathy, and leading with judgment, then what happens is you're no longer a safe place for that person. So by me saying, you don't need medication, you just need to exercise, or, this is just a season, like, that causes a rift between you and that person, where I'm no longer a safe person for them to process their thoughts and their feelings. And that right there is why I believe we're seeing so many people commit suicide, because they didn't have anybody to go to be in a safe place. And so I just, I have definitely wish I could go back and rehab some of those conversations. So anyway,
well, there's a line in the book that I say, you have to earn the right to have those conversations, and you earn that right by earning their trust.
Yes,
right?
that's so good.
And that doesn't mean, and I hope you understand this, and I'll get back to your question, but that doesn't mean you as the friend have to have all the right answers. I think sometimes like, forget anxiety, right? But when someone comes to us and says like, I'm struggling with X, Y, or Z, like sometimes we can be like, oh, awkward turtle, you know, like what am I gonna do? Like, and because we feel like we have to have the answers right away. And I think we have to be okay, and I'm giving you permission to not have the answers.
Yes.
And that is okay. Like you have permission to say, you know what, Holly, like, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for trusting me with that. And I want to learn and understand and grow and be there for you. I don't know exactly the best thing right now. I'm going to look into it. I'm going to buy books on it to help me understand, but know that like, let's walk through this together. Like whatever it is, I'm here and you're not alone. And that sometimes that just means like, I'm going to sit here and just not say anything and let you cry and let you spew and let you do whatever, right? Yes. And that's okay. We need to be comfortable with that, and we're not.
Yes.
So let me go back then to what I want.
So the first was that medication is okay. That was,
so you had said something, and I think it's important to understand, like anxiety. And so when I say anxiety, again, going back to that idea of like OCD is under anxiety, right? So I'll just use that term to cover kind of all of that. But anxiety is both a physical and a spiritual problem. And so I think what has happened in the church is they say, well, you can't possibly say it's not a spiritual issue, but then they and then they go all the way to say it's only a spiritual issue. I don't think anyone who's a person of faith who has struggled with anxiety can say, no, they're not saying it's not a spiritual issue as well. But in order for me to actually address the spiritual, I have to be in a place where I can actually address the spiritual, right? And so if I'm not treating what's physically going on with me, and you're right, like exercise is a great way, but it's not everything, right? Like there is literally chemicals in my brain that when I get into that fight or flight mode and say, I don't want to be thinking about this. I know this is stupid and I know this is irrational. I can't stop thinking about it, right? And so how am I ever going to address the spiritual issues that are going on underneath, you know, lack of trust, you know, pride, saying that I can control everything, like how can I ever get to that point if I am not able to stop thinking about locking the door?
Yes.
Like I can't, John, pause. This is a control issue. Like if I'm in a mental cycle, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
So what I say is, if my anxiety is an 8 normally without medication, medication brings it down to a 4. And when I'm at a 4, I can then have those more rational conversations with myself. I can then be put in a position where I'm like, yeah, you know what? Okay, take a step back. All right, practice mindfulness. Go on a run. Hit the Word of God and open it up. And okay, yes, then I can get to that position. But medication for me, and by the way, in the wake of the pandemic, I've talked to several pastors who never had anxiety before. Anxiety popped up. They felt so shameful. They felt like their faith wasn't there because they started thinking about taking medication. And what I would say is, medication is a common grace given to us by God. The rain, the sun, a good steak, food, like it's stuff He's given to all of us. And we are actually limiting God by telling Him, you can treat me any other way but with medication. Like what is that? Like why would we, if I fell and broke my elbow, like and went to the doctor and I said, Doc, I'm in a lot of pain. He's like, oh, okay, here's a pain pill. No. Anything but the pain pill. I want you to take away the pain without the pain pill. And he'd be like, there's literally, like, it's right here. You just take this pain pill. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or Doc, I broke my elbow. Okay, let's put it in a cast. No, anything, heal the bone any other way but the cast. Well, John, we can put it in a cast. If we don't put it in a cast, you're never going to be able to really operate it the way it's supposed to. It needs to grow back and heal. You know, I'm saying so. like that's common sense to us when it comes to any other, broken part of the body. But when it comes to a broken brain, apparently we're just like, nope, no,
Yes.
God, no, I'm doing anything but that,
Yeah.
And I could go on, and the book talks more in depth about medication, what's going on inside of you, hammers more and explains the idea of common grace. But that's kind of the overview of that first one.
Well, in the way that I love that you address, which I think is it sounds so simple when you say it, but I think a lot of people haven't thought about it before, which is like, of course we need to address the spiritual component of it, but we have to heal the physical part of that so that we can then focus on the spiritual part. And I feel like, I don't know that I've heard it communicated that simply before, where you're like,
right,
obviously, okay, that makes sense. So,
I think people want to reduce this down to two camps. There's either the medication camp or the non-medication and the spiritual camp. And what I'm saying is, no, that like for me, they're together, right? The medication helps me, address the spiritual issues that I know are going on. Like, I'm not going to pretend that there's not spiritual issues. There's spiritual issues to any addiction, to anything you're struggling with. There's spiritual issues to, the person who has an affair, right? It's not just that, oh, they're really attracted to other people. Like, what is it about your commitment? What is it about not following through on your, like, there's other things that are an issue there. Like, completely. It doesn't have to be an either or.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so we've talked about our message to church leaders that we want them to hear would be that medication is okay. And then what's the second one?
The second thing would be really understanding the proper theology of suffering. And this is where the spiritual component that I'm talking about comes in, right? Is you need to be telling your people that God is working in the mess. I grew up in a theology and denomination that basically just said if you pray about not just your mental health, but if you pray about anything and you believe it's going to happen, it will happen. $1 million, a new car, property, mental health, like whatever you wanted was at your fingertips. And that's not a proper theology of suffering. It's not what's in the Bible, right? Like Paul talks about the thorn. Jesus says you will have trouble. You look at what happened to the apostles and the disciples. Like none of that lines up with kind of that idea that whether you realize it or not has infused a lot of the church today. And so you need to be teaching and telling your people, like, listen, it's not that you're going to go through trials. You're going to go through troubles. What you need to do and what you need to learn and understand is that God has promised to redeem them. He has promised to use them to grow you, to grow others, and he is going to be faithful in that. And that doesn't mean you can't be like, this sucks.
Yeah.
Right? There's a whole Bible a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations, right?
Yeah.
You can lament, you can cry out. David cried out and said, like, what is going on? This is so unfair. I hate this. Jesus in the garden said, take this cup from me. Like, please. You can say, like, this isn't, I can't really wrap my head around this. And I would say, yes, because guess what? In those moments that David cried out and Jesus cried out and you cry out, that's bringing you closer to the Lord. You're actually coming to understand, I can't do it all. I can't figure it out. I can't make everything right.
Yeah.
Wow. You can't make everything right? Interesting. So what does that mean? If you can't make everything right, you need someone that can make it right. You need someone that is greater and outside of yourself. So that would be the second thing, a proper theology of suffering.
Okay.
And then I would say the third thing is it's okay to admit that you can't fix it all as a church leader, right? Yeah. You can point people outward.
Yes, I think this is so important.
I think especially there's only a few mega, or maybe not a few, but like not every church is a mega church.
Right.
Right?
Most churches, almost all churches are not mega churches.
So you as, let's say, a pastor, like you're playing counselor, you're wearing all of these hats. I don't expect as a person suffering from anxiety, like, yes, I want to go to you and have that kind of person that can at least just listen and understand, but I don't expect you to have all the answers,
Yeah.
right? But what I do expect from you is to point me in the right direction, right? And so it's okay to say, you know, if you have a pastoral counseling session and someone comes to you and says, man, I really have a lot of anxiety. I'm really depressed. I mean, you can pray with them and say, listen, I want to help you address those spiritual issues. You know, there's a great Christian counselor down the road. Like, I would love for you to go to see them. I would love for you to put me on the form so that they can talk to me about this, so that we can all be in chorus together about what the best way to handle this is.
Yeah.
And then let's attack it all together. You can point people outward, and you should.
Yes.
You do not have to bear the weight and the responsibility of everything. And that is why, by the way, we see pastors who then develop anxiety themselves,
Right.
who then develop depression themselves, because they feel like they have to be the end all be all, and you do not have to do that. So I say that not as like an indictment of church leaders that may be watching this. I say it to free you up, to give you freedom, and to say it's okay. It's definitely okay to point people outward.
Yes, so good. So if you're a church leader, let's sum that up real quick, because those were 3 really good points. So 1, medication is okay.
Yep.
2, a proper theology of suffering. And then 3, that it's okay and great to point people outward, especially I would say to professionals. Because I
Yes,
think
absolutely.
when we don't do that, that's another example of how we're diminishing the seriousness of mental health. And I'm over it. Like, we can't diminish this any longer. Too many people are suffering. Too many people are committing suicide. And I'm so grateful for people like you that are sharing your story and being vulnerable and giving voice to it and normalizing it in a way of that we can talk about it. And it's okay and it's good to share with each other so that we can help each other carry the burdens that we face.
I'm curious, by the way, I know you had kind of mentioned this earlier, but like you had said that you had kind of come from a place of, you know, tough it out. Like, like what was it for you that created that switch, that changed that perspective for you? As someone who obviously has had conversations with people like that, like I'm just curious what it is that changed that for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the couple things. One was seeing the result for afterwards, once, like, seeing the power of medication, of like, oh, yeah, seeing, you know, one person in particular that's coming to mind at their worst, meaning like the darkest part of that season in their life, and just never having seen them like that before, and really from a distance, it's really easy to say, you know, oh, you don't need to be on medication, or, you know, you just need to eat better or exercise and prioritize things in your life, etc. But then when I was able to spend time with them and really see, like, this is really bad and this is scary, and then when, you know, them getting help with medication was a game changer for them, to be able to help normalize them and get them into a healthy spot so that they could start to take care of those other things in their life. And then I think secondly, you know, just like so many of us who have, and myself, I'll just speak for my own story over the last year and a half of having, like, I remember Dr. Clements in college. He unfortunately is not with us anymore, but he had a really hard finance class, and I remember I had a panic attack in his class. And so I've always had, being a high achiever, had those moments of anxiety. But over the last year and a half, where it's been more present on a regular basis with COVID, you know, went through a really tough work season during COVID. I worked with a lot of churches, and COVID just completely changed that. And so that was really, really stressful. And then I decided to start my own company. Like, that was a lot of, like, super exciting, but also a lot of anxiety. And then I decided to join a company full time. That's a startup, and it was so exciting, but like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So that's a lot of like, you know, 3 a.m. wake ups of feeling like, can I do this? You know, and having those moments where it feels like,
how am I dropping the ball?
Yeah, too much to carry in the middle of a pandemic, right? And so having those moments over the last, you know, couple of years of going, like, I can see how I could go to a place where, this would be really bad. And so, yeah, I think that was the switch for me, like those two, a personal experience and then someone in my life that I really loved and cared for that had a lot of judgment towards, really seeing, and then being bold enough to be like, hey, your perspective on this is not helpful to me. And being able to say, like it's not okay the way that I handled that.
And I just, I know the company you're working at is called Leader Now.
Yes,
right?
that's
and
right.
I feel like but that is the mark of a good leader, right? Is someone who can change their mind. I think a lot of times we just say strength is found in, sticking to your guns, and you're gonna lead people by forging a path ahead. And we forget that vulnerability, I think, is one of the greatest leadership characteristics that there is, and being willing to admit that you are wrong. Like, I want to follow people who are willing to say I was wrong.
Yes.
Right? Because that's more like me, right? Like, not necessarily admitting it, but like, I know that I'm not always right. So if you pretend like you're always right, like that's just not real.
Yeah.
I want to follow real people who say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, or I'm wrong, or I was wrong there.
Yeah.
Like that, I feel like is such a good example of leadership. And I think more leadership in the church that is needed and throughout.
Well, it's definitely something I'm working on, vulnerability. I'm an Enneagram 8, and so like vulnerability is really hard for me, but I'm definitely working on trying to, because I think I'm really great at faking vulnerability. That's something I've been thinking
Just
about.
enough to
make you feel like I'm being real, but I'm really holding back a lot of
right.
this junk. So that's something I'm working on. So it means a lot that you shared that, because it's something I'm really trying to work on. Because I agree, I love following people who are vulnerable. I think it takes guts and courage, and I admire that a lot. It's just harder to do. So I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you so much. Okay, so where can people find? Well, first of all, I will say, if you are a church leader watching this, I recommend go buy a bunch of the book. Is there a place where people can buy a bulk order?
Yeah, you can go to bulkbooks.com,
Okay.
and they have the book. They have the book in bulk on there.
Perfect.
So I think you have to order 25, and it drops the price by a
ton.
30-something%.
That's awesome. Well, I love that, because even if you don't want to do I think you should do like a small group or a study with it, but even just to have them and share them with friends that are struggling with anxiety, or maybe who need a different perspective. Or you even have a whole chapter, I think, right, where it's kind of from, was it from Brett's perspective?
So it's an entire chapter dedicated just to people who are walking with or trying to understand people who are struggling.
Yes.
And that was a chapter inspired by my wife, because the whole way that I got to this point of opening up and getting help was seeing how she was struggling. And so I can understand how lonely of a place that can be. And it's so neat. Like, you people who are like my wife, who have also suffered and who are also trying to figure out what the best way forward is, like, you need to be loved and cared for.
Yes,
and so that chapter has a lot of encouragement from my wife in it. And so so even if you're not a person who struggles with this, the book is not just for them. It's also for you as a person trying to love someone like me.
It's so good. And then it's on Amazon for pre-order, because it's not released until
so it's gonna ship in September.
Okay, in September.
And but it's available for pre-order right now. And so just, you can go to Amazon, you can go to findrestnow.com.
Findrestnow.com.
Yep.
And then John's not going to say this, but I can say this. It's like number one this week. It was number one in anxiety disorders, mood disorders, new release,
pastoral care.
Yeah.
It's
amazing.
crazy. It came out and it instantly became a number one new release and number one bestseller. And
Yay! So changing the conversation.
That's exactly, like, that is what is, for me, if we can have a book like this that really kind of hits a lot of the bestseller lists, imagine what that does to the conversation. Like, that gets me so excited to know that people are going to have this conversation from a perspective, by the way, like, of faith, and from a perspective of what it looks to treat this disease and these issues, both physically and spiritually. You know,
So good.
in one of the categories, I'm second behind Oprah, right?
What? I didn't know that. That's awesome.
But like Oprah's book, I don't, you know, it's not approaching this in the same way that I am,
Yes.
right? And
Sorry,
so,
I just got excited.
No,
about
no, I am too. I'm like, you know, I'm coming for you, Oprah.
Yeah.
But to see like that to me is important, right? Because
Yes.
if you're looking for a book on anxiety, okay, you have Oprah's option and then you have this option, right? And hopefully that person or those people are going to say, oh, okay, I'll get Oprah's book, sure. Oh, maybe I'll get this book too, and it's going to help hopefully, like you said, change the conversation that they're having with others and with themselves.
That's so good. So
FindRestNow.com.
FindRestNow.com, JohnSeidl.com.
JohnSeidl.com.
You send out a weekly? Is it weekly?
I try to make it weekly,
Okay,
but
well, they're so good.
With kids 6 and 3, sometimes it doesn't. But it will become more regular now that we're in kind of this season, because I want to have as many touch points with you and be talking about this conversation
Well,
more
that's
so.
awesome. You can go subscribe and get his awesome emails. Well, thank you, John.
Thanks,
so grateful
Holly.
for you, and I'm cheering you on.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.